you got the third volume? Do you have it?
Do I have?
The third volume of Bava Kamma.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And anyway, okay, let's continue with what the Netziv said. The Netziv talking about righteous and upright people. The Netziv's evaluation of Jews in that era and how they brought about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is based on the Gemara and Yuma. They were engaged in Torah study, mitzvahs, and acts of loving kindness. So why was it destroyed? It was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred. This teaches you that baseless hatred is equivalent to the three cardinal sins of idolatry, adultery, and murder. And the Sib elaborates on the words of the Gemara. They were righteous and pious people who toiled in Torah learning. However, they were not upright in worldly matters. Therefore, because of the sinat chinam that was in their hearts towards each other, they suspected someone who they saw acting not in accordance with their concept of worshipping Hashem, of being a Sadducee or a heretic. Through this, they came to virtually committing a murder and all of the evils of the world, leading to the destruction of the temple. With this tragedy, our sages validated the divine judgment. Hashem is upright and fair and does not tolerate such righteous people, in inverted commas, unless they also follow the path of fairness in worldly matters and not with crookedness, even if it be for the sake of heaven, for this causes the devastation of creation and the ruin of civilization. Okay, I'll continue with that on Monday. It's another 2 paragraphs.
Okay.
You get, as we've discussed before, people like to give musar, and some people who do that have got skeletons in their own closet, as we've discussed.
Yeah, but Kevin, you've got to get rid of these toxic people out of your life.
As you said, people who said other than mentally ill.
Yeah, no, you can get rid of these people. I don't know why you entertain them.
No. I haven't for a while. There was a.
Record. Just give me a sec. Oh, we are recording. Silly me. All right, guys, let's get started. If you have a look where we left off with the 6th enactment, where Ezra instituted that a woman shall rise early in the morning and bake, so that the bread will be available for the poor when they go from house to house seeking food. So this is good for 2 reasons, the Gemara says. Firstly, that the rich will not be suspected of withholding their form of tzedakah from the poor, and that the poor will have something to eat. Because, as Voltaire said, the only thing that stops the rich from being murdered by the poor is religion. Why? Because anybody that fears the afterlife won't turn on the masses, won't turn on the minority. And who are in the masses? The poor. So if the poor are being taken care of from the rich in terms of charity, and the Gemara says that will appease the poor, because everybody's got different lots in life. But Voltaire was saying something else, is that at the end of the day, the poor will kill the rich if not for the fear of heaven, which is quite insightful. Although Voltaire had a bit of a problem, because in the French Revolution he lost his head, not only literally but figuratively, because he didn't have any perspective of where to end it. And it became anarchy. That being aside, let's go through the 7 enactment that Ezra instituted. And it was that a woman shall wear breeches, underwear, for the purposes of modesty. It wasn't common culturally then. And obviously Jewish people were very machmir when it came to modesty. Now, Ezra's 8th enactment needs a little bit of explanation, because a woman shall comb her hair and then immerse herself in the mikveh. So the Gemara basically wonders why the enactment was necessary, because we know that the combing requirement is of biblical origin. In other words, what do you mean Ezra taught it? It was biblical. Because the Torah states, well, it's using this pasuk with regards to a man, so too with a woman, is that if you look at Leviticus Vayikra chapter 14 verse 9, the verse refers mainly to Metzora, one inflicted with saras. that has to immerse themselves in a mikveh in order to become tahor, to become pure. So obviously this can be extruded and interpreted to mean that basically both a man and a woman that's in a state of impurity needs to become pure, and that they would have to comb their hair, because it was taught, and he shall immerse his flesh in the water, which teaches that there should be no foreign matter interposing between his flesh and the mikveh water. Now, the phrase his flesh in the water implies that his entire flesh must have in contact with the water. And what would be a barrier to flesh? That which is auxiliary to one's flesh, which would be the hair. Now, if you have a look, the Hebrew word et usually introduces a direct object, right? It's not really a translatable word as such. It's an amplifier. So what does it amplify? Anything that's auxiliary to the flesh, which means it's an interposition to the flesh. It's attached to the flesh. And that's brought in the fifth daf of Sukkah, which would be the hair. So from here, we basically see that the biblical law of interpositions applies to hair as well. So no rabbinic enactment from Ezra or anybody else is needed to require combing of the hair before immersion to remove any knots or foreign matter, because there can't be a barrier between the immersion, both of hair as well as body, and anything obscuring the hair from immersion would become a difficulty. So the Gemara says, well, how do you resolve this issue? That it's saying it's an Ezra enactment when we know it's a biblical one. The Gemara says if you have to analyze it properly under biblical law, you only have to examine your hair to see if it's knotted or perhaps somewhat dirty, but the immersion would be invalid mainly because of an interposition. So the combing is a rabbinical enactment to be scrupulous, that when you comb through the hair, that you can ensure that nothing is caught in the hair, there's no knots, and there's an absence of any interposition on the hair. Okay. What's also recommended, guys, as a matter of interest, just is that there is a cleaning of the hair. So in other words, what you should know is that the mikveh is not a place where you bath. No one wants you to go with shampoo in the mikveh and start to clean where your oils, your bodily oils and gram rise off the water. Okay, so Ezra came and instituted that combing be performed to ensure the absence of any interposition in the hair. In other words, he's more scrupulous than just untangling the hair. So the Gemara now explains the ninth enactment, and Ezra instituted that peddlers of perfumes shall circulate in the towns for the sake of women's adornments. In other words, the peddlers were welcomed into the city. Some other peddlers of snake oil, or this cures all ills, or snake oil salesman. Did you ever hear the term snake oil salesman? It comes from the Wild West, when people would sell all sorts of potions and lotions and things to apparently cure all ills. So that apparently wasn't, after you caught somebody once in a con, they weren't eager to have you back. But since perfume is legit, it's enacted. And why? Because Ezra did not want the woman to become repulsive to their husbands, and the townspeople that might have been fewer in number of the woman compared to the men and the boys, etc., couldn't say this isn't a popular product, we don't want it. No, even if the women were in the minority, the vendors were allowed to sell their perfumes in order to make them husbands exactly. And it said, by the way, in that do you remember when during Egypt that women had to go in the fields with mirrors?
The copper, yeah.
Copper, because they reflected the woman's beauty, and do a dance or something to attract their husbands back, because the husbands were so often depressed. It was like living in the Holocaust, that they didn't want to bring children into the world anymore. I'm serious. And what happened was that it was the woman's merit that got the husbands enticed to have more children because the men were quite depressed about it. It's not a joke. It was like
And
a
they
Holocaust in Egypt. They were
and they used
enslaved.
those copper mirrors for the kior in the temple, because it
Exactly.
was for they had holy intentions to perpetuate the Jewish
Correct.
people.
So it wasn't from anything other than wanting to make sure that the next generation of Jews were born. I mean, the Egyptians made Hitler look like a Boy Scout. Let's go on. All right. So basically, the 10th and final enactment that Ezra instituted was immersion for Bavli Kiri, which means any guy that had a seminal emission. So the Gemara wondered, why do you need that enactment again? And an immersion requirement is of biblical origin. In other words, we read that if a man has psoriasis, he needs to be going to a mikveh because he's unpure. If he has a discharge of semen that has been issued, he needs to immerse his entire flesh in the water. Okay, so that's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 15, verse 16. The Gemara answers immersion is of a biblical prerequisite for a Balkiri who wishes to eat teruma and sacred offerings. So since that is the case, what did Ezra add that was extra? Because since it was a biblical enactment, it wasn't rabbinic. So the reason is that the Gemara said that Ezra came and instituted immersion even for a Balkiri who merely wishes to study the words of Torah. Because accordingly, in Gemara Brochos chapter, well, it's the Daf, in the 21st and 22nd Daf, is that in order to learn Torah, you had to go into a mikveh immersion. If you had semen, if you discharged semen, not even if you had semen on your body. So the halacha nowadays is different, guys. A balei keri may not immerse, well, may not, of course he may, but he need not immerse in a mikveh before studying Torah. So what Kevin's law is that he learned is you go under the shower, I think for 20 or 30 seconds, and you soak yourself.
3 minutes.
20 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, so for 3 minutes, he soaps himself down, make sure there's adequate, and that's not immersion, that's just shower water.
No, I think it's just you just shower, just under the water for 3 minutes.
Correct.
You don't have to use soap.
Well, I would suggest using soap because that stuff can stick. I'm just saying. So the reality is, Rav Yehuda ben Peseira stated in the 136th Daf of Chulin that learning words of Torah were not susceptible to contamination, so you didn't have to go in a mikveh, but to wash yourself adequately 3 minutes in the shower, etc., was required just out of respect for the Torah. But the question arises, how can Rav Yehuda's ben Peseira's based in overturn a enactment of Ezra who came before him? Because, one court can't nullify the edict of an earlier court unless it's greater in wisdom and in number. So that's in the 36b Daf of Gittin, and Idios, which is part of Idios, if you don't know, is part of Nezikin. So the Rishonim offer several examples. Rav Yehuda held that Ezra never made that enactment. That's the first answer. Second answer is that Ezra himself stipulated that this particular edict could be overturned. And the reason being is the majority of Jewish people didn't accept Ezra's decree on this issue, on his other issues it did, and therefore it never became binding. I suppose because seminal emissions were pretty popular, and a guy would need the time to go to a mikveh. No, we're talking about a seminal emission here.
Common, you mean?
No, it was common. I'm saying, what were you going to do every time? You want to study Torah, so you go to the mikveh all the time. So therefore, it might have been more popular to study Torah than to go to mikveh before studying Torah. There are Hasidic groups that do it as a matter of course, because out of respect they have for the Torah, it's the right thing to do.
I go every day.
Yeah, they go every day. because of this. So the Gemara now, guys, has concluded its discussion of Ezra's 10 enactments, and it's now going to produce another list of 10. And these were 10 things that were said about Jerusalem. They are as follows. Number one, a house in Jerusalem is not permanently sold. In other words, when you sell a house in any walled city in Eretz Israel, other than in Jerusalem, you only have a year to redeem it. In other words, to buy it back, even against the purchaser's wishes. In other words, you have to give them the purchase price back, but you've got a year of buyer's remorse in any walled city in Eretz Israel. If the seller fails to do so, the house passes in perpetuity to the purchaser. Even Yovel, the Jubilee year, guys, doesn't cause it to revert back to the seller. So Jerusalem, on the other hand, has the law of an open city, meaning that its sold houses may be redeemed at any time if no redemption occurs. In other words, the house reverts back to its original owner, even with the arrival of the Yovel year, providing that it's bought back. You can't obviously charge somebody for something you haven't given them. So in other words, there's only the concept in Yerushalayim of rental, to make sure that it stays within the family, and that once you sell it, you can take it back at a later stage. You just have to refund the money. Where do you know this from? There's a commentary on Rashi in Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 25, and verse 29 to 31. And we want to know the reason for that. We're going to go through it in more detail. So a house in Jerusalem is not permanently sold. Second law is the city does not bring a calf to be decapitated. What does that mean? Is that basically if a corpse from an unwitnessed murder is found lying in the open, the elders of the town nearest to the corpse must perform a public ritual that involves decapitating a calf and declaring the innocence of contributing to the murder. So what do we mean is that basically that they didn't know about it. Okay, so they're going to do an investigation. In other words, the elders of the town weren't in on the murder. Neither was the city in general. It was a lone individual, maybe a group of people, but certainly not of having their sort of involvement. And where's that? In Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 1 to 9. So why is Jerusalem exempt from this mitzvah? We're going to go through why that is. Another issue, the third reason, the reason Jerusalem is different, and that is it does not become a wayward city. So what do we mean by a wayward city? If a city becomes so spiritually corrupt that all of the citizens, or even most of the citizens, are enticed to worship idols, the entire city is declared a wayward city. In other words, it's irani dachat. I don't know. Do you remember this, Gavin, in Sanhedrin, when you kill the inhabitants of the city? Remember, we learned this. You were part of Sanhedrin.
Yeah, no, I do. I don't know which part, but I remember.
So listen, Gavin, you remember the bottom line is the guilty parties are
towards the end, by the way. It was towards the end.
I know, that's why I'm mentioning it. You joined by that stage. So the guilty parties, Arthur, are executed by the sword. And the property of all the inhabitants is destroyed. Now, you know that generally, what is the punishment for an individual that's involved with idol worship, Kevin?
Burning, I think, is it stoning or?
Yeah, so there's an argument with Rav Shimon and the rabbis. Rabbi Shimon says stoning. Rabbi Shimon says burning. The rabbis say stoning because they say, what is more serious? Whatever is the more serious penalty we give. But obviously, Rabbi Shimon says that burning is worse than stoning. The rabbis say stoning is worse than burning. But the most harsh punishment is given for idolatry on an individual basis. So there's a different reason why, as a group, they executed and they use a sword. But anyway, that's for Sanhedrin. The property of all the inhabitants are destroyed because you cannot, in a era nidachat, utilize any of the property because the property could have been used in the practice of avodah zarah. So the study, what you must know is suddenly when it's done, there's trials and everything else, but the city must be razed and remain a desolate heap. You can't ever rebuild the city. So that's in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 13 to 19. You can look through the details there. But the bottom line is that you can't do that for Jerusalem. So the question is, what happens? What happens for Jerusalem? Is there not the death penalty for mass idolatry? The answer is yes. But you don't raise the city to the ground, and what becomes of the belongings? You can't use it. But you certainly don't raise Jerusalem to the ground, that's for sure, never to be used again. You see, that's the problem, is that you can never rebuild it once you burn it and raise it to the ground. So you can't use it. Death penalty is still applicable, but how it's implemented is different. But Jerusalem as a city never becomes a wayward city. And also it's not defiled. The fourth law is it's not defiled by tsaras affliction. So what do we mean there is that the houses of Jerusalem, interestingly enough, are not susceptible to tsaras contamination, where the walls get that infection and the property gets that infection. The person will get the infection. That's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 14, verse 34 to 53. So the person gets tsaras, but not the houses themselves. And also there's another law, the fifth law, that we do not extend beams and balconies in Jerusalem. The reason being is that they can't, the balconies or the beams can't overhang in the area, in any area. Why do you think that is, guys?
Maybe it's because for a sukkah, little people want to have their sukkahs. They won't be able to because it'll be over. It'll block the air, block the airspace.
So you're right in that.
Or security or safety.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. It actually does bring it into Morah Sukkah, as far as I know. But the main issue is a Mishnah in Bava Basra in the 60th daf. And it says basically in all the towns, you can't have this sort of extension in the public domain. But in Jerusalem, you can't have balconies and beams overhang in any area, never mind just in the public domain. And the reason is that during the three festivals, people are going to get injured. You're going to have a mass influx of people. People are not aware of what's jutting out. Like when you go to a neighborhood, you know, there's one particular dog on the street that's got rabies or mad or something. So you generally know the occupants and inhabitants of that street, and that sort of street you kind of avoid, you know, or you know that there's a beam that's strutting out. But if you're a visitor in the city and you're dodging beams and overhangs and balconies and things like that, it could be quite dangerous, especially if there's a mass amount of people coming in on the three festivals. So there you've got to be careful. So Jerusalem won't allow strutting out because that's during the three regalim, the three festivals. It's a very populated city, and we don't want to cause injuries. Now, there's a sixth enactment that we do not manage kilns in the city. What do we mean manage kilns? And you can't make garbage dumps. Is that kilns create fires and soot and smoke that you can't have in the city of Jerusalem. It's going to pollute it. It's going to create a blackening on the walls. You can't make garbage dumps because that's obviously going to stink of garbage and bring rats and sherrits and all sorts of other things. So you can't do that. They're obviously doing it now in Jerusalem, but you're not allowed to halachically. You're not allowed to create, on the seventh issue, gardens and orchards in the city. In other words, it's not a place where you're meant to grow things within Jerusalem itself. You can have your own little garden, but you're not there to harvest orchards or gardens, etc. That's for other areas of Jerusalem and other cities. But Jerusalem is meant for the court system. It's meant for the judicial system, the parliamentary system, the temple area, matters of holiness, etc. It's not a gardening area. The only garden that you can have as public is known as the Garden of Roses. So the Garden of Roses, it's not a garden where you can grow roses. It's called the Garden of Roses because it was provided even back in the day. In other words, it was, how do I put this? It was in existence from the days of the first prophets. Why? Because the garden provided a special scent called Jordan amber. It was an extract from roses that was an ingredient in the incense used in the temple service. So that was in Chrysos, in the sixth daf. So that extract acquired its name from the fact that rose bushes naturally grow on the banks of the Jordan River. And then that garden was implanted where it would be near the temple where you could take the scent needed, the Kohanim could take it. But generally, you couldn't have public gardens and fruits and orchards, etc., in Jerusalem. But something that was from the days of the first prophets, even when the temple no longer stood, you needed that. So just a weird commentary that I read is that you don't raise chickens in Jerusalem. Guys, do you remember why? We've studied this. Guys?
It's not just
Because
Jerusalem.
they're
It was,
bringing shirts from the outside, like lizards and all that stuff.
Just repeat it. Arthur, I think, has the right answer. Arthur, why?
And they can bring in chariots and lizards and
yes,
dead
yes.
things. They're not supposed to.
Excellent,
They cannot
excellent.
Well done. Well
Well
done.
done.
Permanent.
It's exactly it. Is that chickens pick in the soil and they bring out worms and little lizards and some chickens are even carnivorous where they take larger sherritzes, but like lizards, etc. But certainly worms. All of those things are sherritz. And why can't you have a sherritz in Jerusalem? Arth?
Because it's not good.
Tumor. Brings tumor.
Yes, and why can't you have tumor specifically in Jerusalem? Arth?
Why are you picking on me?
I'm not.
Sunday.
You're the only
Saturday
one
night.
with the answer. I'm saying, what's the reason?
Oh, why can't you have summer in Jerusalem? Because it's a holy place.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because you have kohanim and you've got truma and you've got food that cannot be infected or infect the kohen or temple service or anything like that with the sheretz. Exactly as Kevin said.
Okay.
Kevin, that's exactly it. It's a place where there are offerings in the temple. So therefore, that place cannot be contaminated for kohanim or even normal people bringing food into Jerusalem or animals for sacrifice. So now one other thing, if you remember, is we can't keep a corpse overnight in Jerusalem. Arthur, why do you think? You're on a roll.
Because the corpse is tumor.
Exactly. It's the word. It's Bava Kamma. It's the most serious tumor. Exactly. So that can't be. That must be. If somebody lives in Jerusalem and they die, you don't chuck them out of Jerusalem. You bury them that same day. And then, if it's a corpse that has to stay overnight, you have to take them out of the city of Jerusalem, okay, or to be buried outside. But they can't infect people. And where's that from? It's obviously from a myriad of sources. We've done it in the 79th daf, etc. So the Gemara is obviously going to go through each of the statements. So let's just go back to the first one is a house in Jerusalem. What do you mean you can't permanently sell it? Because it's written regarding the redemption of the walled city houses that there was, all right, guys, look, there was a Tanaic dispute, but we're going to go through that now. But in principle, if you look at Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 30, that's the fact of the biblical source. There, a war, how do I explain this simply? Let me just give you a simple description. is that the reason why a house in Jerusalem is not permanently sold is it was written regarding the redemption of walled city houses, but if it's not redeemed, then a home that is in a city that is a walled house shall pass in perpetuity to the one that purchased it for all his generations. And the author of the statement holds that Jerusalem was not apportioned among the tribes. In other words, there's a dispute in Gemara Yoma in the 12th daf that whether Jerusalem was apportioned to the tribes of Yehuda and Benjamin, or whether Joshua divided the land where every tribe was entitled to use Jerusalem. So it seems to go that the temple city, which was Jerusalem, doesn't qualify to be exclusively used by Yeshua and Benjamin. And therefore, one who purchased it can basically make sure that they can use the houses on a rental basis to I don't know, there are two opinions. The basic opinion is the Yom Shlomo said that you can't rent it out because the tenants of Jerusalem are tenants themselves. In other words, you can't permanently sell your house. At the end of the day, there's no selling and purchasing. You just like permanent residence there, and it shall stick to all your generations. And there's another opinion that says, well, you're a tenant yourself, so you can't rent out your house. If you've got a case where you can never permanently sell your house, even with the Bavli, there's no such thing as renting it out to people that come from the festivals, because you yourself are a renter. You can't rent out what you're renting. And there's another opinion that says you can. But the bottom line of it is that there's buyer's remorse for up to 12 months in any walled city. In Jerusalem, it's longer. It's like kind of forever, is that if you want to buy it back, you can. So the second statement is you can't bring a calf to be decapitated because it's written in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 1, that Jerusalem does not bring a calf to be decapitated, because if a corpse will be found in the land that Hashem your God gives to you to possess, it's exempt from that. So the author of that statement holds that Jerusalem was not apportioned among the tribes, meaning that it's excluded from the law of a decapitated calf. So, in other words, the elders of the city closest to where the dead body is has to bring the calf, but not Jerusalem. In other words, it's not possessed